Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our 6th webinar, Building Back Better. It's the last webinar of our webinar series, and it's great to welcome today, first of all, my co-moderator, Alia Haran Surakat. Great to see you. And I'm really happy that you're helping me out during this last webinar series. Alia is working for the Higher Council for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in Jordan, Amman, and you're also currently in your office in Jordan, Amman. I see that. And you are an advisor to the president of the Higher Council for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities since March 2015. You're also a director of the International Relations and Cooperation Department with the Higher Council, and you're working to ensure that disability and human rights are upheld and sustained within a variety of national policy and strategies. You hold a master's degree in politics and international relations and a bachelor degree in European studies, both from the Royal Holloway University of London. You have extensive experience and academic background are further reinforced by your personal and practical experience both in Jordan and UK. And as a person living with multiple disabilities, you know what you're talking of. And I mean, like, and we both have this passion of fighting for the rights of persons with disabilities. And it's great to welcome you. I will hand over to you, and I will remain in the background till the end. So Alia, welcome, and I'm handing over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie, for this gracious introduction and this gracious idea to serve as co-moderator with you. It's a privilege and a pleasure. To everyone listening to us today, I say good afternoon from Amman, Jordan, and it's great to have you all with us in this final and 6th webinar. Before we start and get into the gist of our discussions today and the presentations we have for you today, I would just like to give a few of the house rules and a few of the logistical issues that for our participants to follow. I am speaking in English, so I will remain speaking in English. Although I know that a lot of our attendees today are Arabic speakers, so we say in Arabic, Ahla wa sahla bi jamia. But for reasons to do with the webinar, I will continue in English. There is, of course, with the spoken language, there is live captioning taking place in both English and Arabic. As you see on the screen, you have our lovely interpreter, Julius Gabe, also interpreting in sign language. And of course, those following the YouTube live stream can follow through as we go along. The presentations today are also available in English, but of course, after the webinar, they will be sent to all participants, whether it's this session or the previous sessions in Arabic. In addition, we have audio and video functionalities. As you see, those have been turned off and switched off for reasons to do with technology, and to ensure that the live stream continues as agreed. And any questions and points for discussions can be posted on the chat at any time. There's a small tiny icon on the right-hand side with a question mark. Participants, please make sure you do post all your questions. And after each presentation, we have Serene Tali from GIZ and Laura from GIZ who will help us to recap your questions and make sure that each question is answered in a timely manner. My final thing before getting into the agenda is that the session is recorded and it will be made available online. The session will be published on the HCD Ministry of Education's platforms, as well as GIZ's YouTube channel. If for any reason any participant does not agree with having this session published or recorded, we gently ask that you leave the platform and then may choose to watch it hereafter. Now, without further ado, I think we'll get to the gist of our our gathering, our discussion today. Of course, as usual, the first 60 minutes we will be listening to presentations from international local experts, and then after the last half an hour, we'll be taking up the questions by Laura and Sirin. We have an interesting lineup of people, of speakers, starting with His Excellency Dr. Nawaf Al-Ajarmi, the Secretary General of the Ministry of Education in Jordan. Of course, the Ministry of Education has been one of the key implementing partners and has been with us throughout the series of the webinar. So thank you to them. We also have speakers from the Enabling Education Network, Ingrid Lewis, and then GIZ's very own Charlotte Bussert will also be joining us. And finally, Abir Murar will also be taking us on a journey down memory lane, recapping the previous 5 webinars that we've had and the main outputs and recommendations from each one. Just as a reminder for those of you who haven't not been joining us the past weeks, basically this idea to have webinars on e-learning interventions in light of COVID came up because GIZ, Ministry of Education, and HCD decided that what exists online is very little in terms of accessible information, accessible know-how on how people with disabilities ought to be taught in situations like COVID or the pandemic or any other pandemic. And so to ensure that they are not lost and kept out of the discussion and of the general e-learning scheme, we came up with the idea for those sessions. To create a space where all key players and partners can be sensitized in all the issues to do with inclusion, of course, under the realm of the Jordanian 10-year National Strategy for Inclusive Education. For this 6th final session, we have a very interesting topic called Building Back Better. So now that the schools are opening soon in August/September, what do we need to do to make sure that students go back to the mainstream education scheme? I will now introduce the first speaker. Ingrid Lewis is the Managing Director of Enabling Education Network, ENET. She has worked with ENET for 18 years, developing and managing a wide range of inclusive education information networking, publishing, training, and research projects. Prior to 2002, she worked with Save the Children as a policy officer focusing on disability and gender. She is also a qualified equine facilitated learning practitioner. Ingrid, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to give this presentation today. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is the first webinar I've done for ages because it's been so busy. So it's really nice to have this opportunity. And I'm just going to, can you see my slides? Can I just check? Are you seeing my slides? Yeah. So I'm going to look at the fact that schools are reopening. But this is not actually the end of learning at home. So the presentation is going to look at the fact that inclusive education is not just about schools. A genuinely inclusive education system looks at a continuum of learning experiences and support from home and the community through to non-formal settings and then through to the formal education institutions. So often inclusive education programs have focused just quite narrowly on schools, and the current crisis has reminded us that education is and has to be about much more than just the formal school system. So in this presentation, I'm going to share just a few thoughts about how we position home learning when we're having these discussions about rebuilding and improving our education systems. So how did we get here? When COVID-19 caused schools to close around the world, we couldn't predict what the full implications were going to be for the learners, for their families and communities, and for the education systems and countries as a whole. The speed, complexity and rigour of the government's responses and their reach has varied massively, even within some countries. In many countries, the schools are now reopening, and they're often doing this in phases, such as exam students returning first. Some have decided not to open at all this year, and some are trying to follow social distancing rules, like limiting the number of children in a class, or organising groups who attend at different times or on different days. And of course, thousands of schools around the world are asking, how can we stay safe when we've got 60 or more children in a class and not even any hand washing facilities? So obviously reopening schools is presenting us with many different challenges. How can we help learners catch up after months of missed education? How can we teach classes of learners who are now probably more academically diverse than they've ever been? How can we deal with the ongoing absence of learners, because some have got their own and some have got family health problems or vulnerabilities that mean they're not coming back to school yet? There's the inevitable growth in dropout rates because families need or want their children to work or get married and not go back to school. And there's the ever-present risk that the pandemic's going to force the schools and society to shut down again. And clearly this has been a devastating crisis for so many people around the world. But I do want us to now consider some of the potential inclusion-oriented opportunities that exist. So I'm going to look at some of the lessons from the learning at home experience. ENET believes that we develop inclusive education systems by being reflective and critical. We learn from everybody's experiences and we listen to colleagues and learners and their families and communities. So to rebuild and reform education systems now, we've got to reflect critically on the experiences of home learning during COVID-19. What can we actually learn that could help us develop a more inclusive and high quality education system? Obviously, there's lots of messages emerging from this experience. We can learn a lot, but I'm just going to focus on a few things that feel particularly relevant to inclusive education. And the first point is that the persistent interpretations and misinterpretations of what education is about undermine inclusion. So the crisis has highlighted in many places the ongoing obsession, I'm going to call it, with seeing education only as a highly academic, exam-driven process. And we did our own rapid global survey in ENET, and it revealed that parents, caregivers, family members in lots of different countries felt under immense pressure to maintain these high academic standards when they were dealing with learning at home. Sometimes this pressure was coming from the government, from schools, from teachers who were providing quite complex instructions for parents on pretty much how parents could become multi-subject, multi-grade teachers overnight. Sometimes this pressure was coming from friends or neighbours or from the parents themselves, like they were competing to see whose child was going to be furthest ahead when schools reopened. And this sort of pressure in the home is not surprising because, you know, if we consider that a pressurized academic system is all that most people have experienced in their lives, so it's inevitable that this became like the template for learning at home. The second key learning point that I want us to take from this current crisis is that equality in learning is not just about equal access. We know that it's not just about getting people into schools, it's about learning in schools and achieving in school. But many families and learners have been overwhelmed by the quantity of online learning materials available. And then many more have been totally demoralised because they haven't had access to any materials. And families have felt despair because they could not offer the time and support or the materials that they wanted for their children. So the inequality of learning opportunities, these have been around for a long time. Okay, this is not something new, but it's really come into the spotlight when schools closed. So equality of learning is not just about access to schools, it's about all the other resources and all the other support that is out there for learning. And this equality has been really highlighted. The third lesson is that education systems do not necessarily provide learners with what they really need in order to participate and learn. So looking at many of the crisis responses that we've seen around the world, many of them are focused on advising parents how to make timetables, how to teach every topic in the curriculum, how to motivate their children to keep learning all day like they would at school. And worryingly, we've also seen a growing discourse on how parents could assess and grade their children's work at home. And this has followed sort of fairly established school-based exam-oriented formula that we're all familiar with. But arguably, it's not what most learners or their families actually needed during this crisis. It wasn't really appropriate. By contrast, we've also seen and been very encouraged by examples of innovations from teachers, families, and learners who rejected the high pressure academic expectations and chose to sort of go with the flow, throwing away the timetables and the rigid curricula and responding flexibly and spontaneously to what was happening in the home and responding to how families and children were feeling each day. And this is the kind of flexibility that characterises inclusive education. And it's the kind of flexibility that formal education systems in many countries did not offer during this crisis. And then the fourth lesson that I want to focus on is that to build an inclusive education system, we have to acknowledge that it's the system that is the problem, not the child. So this is a concept that you will all be familiar with. It's a key concept in inclusive education. It's not the child's fault if they're struggling to learn. It's the teacher's responsibility to teach better and so on. Now, a lot of the discussions that we've seen during this crisis have focused on how education systems can help children, especially most marginalised children, to stay on track with what was expected of their learning at home, or to get back on track with their learning when the schools reopen. And to me, this discourse seems to be rooted in child as problem thinking. It's based on an assumption that the system is going to stay the same when schools reopen, and the child will have to do something special to catch up or to keep up. So in response to this, when ENET chose what it was going to do in response to this crisis, we basically decided to produce some very simple, accessible materials that prioritise family and learner mental well-being because of the amount of stress that was being experienced. So we wanted to stress mental well-being, but also highlighting the accessible learning opportunities that are available in day-to-day life at home. So our message was basically everything you're already doing at home can be a relaxed and fun learning opportunity. Use what you've got in the home and the community. Use what feels comfortable right now, what interests you. Value the real life learning and skills building that happens at home. And this is just a sample of a poster that we've produced as part of our home learning response. So building inclusive education systems that value the home learning experience. Obviously, around the world, many individuals and groups have promoted similar responses to what we just mentioned. But the big question is, to what extent will education systems endorse these kinds of messages? To what extent will the education system value the real life lessons that children have learned during lockdown? Will they recognise the skills that learners have developed through their home learning experiences if those skills and competencies are not currently measured through the existing exam systems? So when schools reopen, will the education systems want business as usual as fast as possible, or will they embrace change and do what the learners really need them to do? I think that if education systems stick rigidly to the pre-crisis way of organising and facilitating and examining learning, they're actually going to build a barrier to millions of children who had no chance to keep up during the school closures, or children who cannot now return to school quickly or regularly for health or disability or other reasons. So building back better after COVID-19 must involve developing an education system that values a wider interpretation of what learning, competency and skills development is about, and that responds to the individual children's needs instead of expecting the child to keep up, catch up or adapt in some other way. Education systems have got to recognise the learning that has happened in homes and acknowledge the value of what families have achieved during this crisis. Right now, millions of parents and caregivers are feeling nervous about what's going to happen to their children, and they're not just frightened for their children's safety when they go back to school. They're actually scared that their children will now fail and that the parents' efforts during lockdown are going to be considered wrong or inadequate. So really the best way that we could say, you know what, we do value your home learning experiences would be to properly embed the idea of learning at home into the education system. And by this, I really don't mean that we should dump more work and responsibility on parents or that we should exclude more learners from formal schools. That's not what I mean. I mean, we need to focus on the idea that an inclusive education system is a continuum of learning, from birth and home, through community-based informal learning opportunities, through to structured non-formal learning, and then the formal school-based learning that we're all familiar with. For months now, learning has been a home and community-based process. So as we build back, we need to ask how schools and the curriculum are now going to more effectively connect with the community and learners' home lives. Why bother? Why should we radically redesign the education system? We could just treat this crisis as a little blip in history and return to normal as fast as possible. Well, for a start, the crisis is not over yet. Schools, they're not all open full time for all year groups. And in some places, children are going to be out of school for many months to come. Home learning is definitely not history yet, so we can't turn our back on it as we start to rebuild schools. Sometimes big challenges only happen after a crisis. A crisis can actually give us an opportunity that socially, economically, or politically might not have been possible before. But we've also got to remember that home learning is not just something that's necessary when we have a crisis. At all ages, children learn huge amounts at home and in the family and the community. Some children are going to rely more than others on opportunities to learn at home. Children with disabilities, with chronic health conditions, children with behavioural challenges or mental ill health, children living in poverty or in remote places. They're all likely to start school later or be unable to attend school as much as their peers for one reason or another. If we have an education system that values learning at home and actually invests in supporting home and community-based learning opportunities, just imagine how many more children could benefit from education. And again, I don't mean this as an alternative to attending mainstream schools, but I mean it as an extra option on this continuum of flexible learning opportunities. Crises like COVID-19, unfortunately, are predicted to become more frequent. So we basically owe it to future generations to become better prepared. If we have education systems that value home and community-based learning and that focus on real-life relevant skills development and not just school-based academic knowledge retention, then a future crisis like this will be less of a shock. We'll have mechanisms in place that can be scaled up. Teachers will be more used to supporting the formal and informal learning in and beyond their schools and classrooms. And families will be more familiar and they'll be more confident with supporting learning at home. So we have to think about this as our future-proofing our education system. This is going to happen again. So inclusive education has never been just a simple checklist of school-based actions. It's never been about just building ramps in schools, providing braille books and hearing aids and sending a few teachers on a training course. Sadly, many programs have operated on that basis, but that's not what the core of inclusive education is. Inclusive education has always been about innovation, finding different ways to approach teaching and learning so that everyone joins in and benefits. This home learning experience that we've been through has handed us a wealth of potential ideas to feed our inclusive education innovations, and we have to take that opportunity. How many countries are going to take this opportunity to learn and more fundamentally change the way the education system works? And how many are simply going to fall back into the old routine as quickly as possible and become oblivious even to the fact that business as usual is now going to exclude even more learners than it did before? So as a final reminder, this crisis has highlighted that learning happens everywhere, anytime, and for everyone. And as we're rebuilding inclusive education systems, this has got to be at the front of our minds so that we grasp the opportunities that we have to more radically rethink education and not just work on opening and getting back to business as quick as we can. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ingrid. I think your last slide says it all. Learning happens everywhere, anytime, and for everyone. I don't know about listeners, but I certainly picked out keywords and key phrases from your presentation. You know, inclusive education is not just about school-based formalities or actions. It's a journey. It's not the child's fault. It's about the system and the system of support that surrounds the child. And basically, the impact of what we learned from home-based learning should be used and utilized to better the mainstream education system. Certainly, really enlightening ideas. I'm pretty sure we have a number of questions from our participants. So if I may ask Serene and Laura to take it away, please.
Yes, sure. We actually have only one question so far, and also Ayman Quaida from ENET was giving some background information. So one question, and I think Stephanie, that's for you, is will this webinar be the last webinar within the series? So maybe you can elaborate a little bit the background of the series, of the webinar series. And Ayman was explaining the work of ENET, that it is an information network and consultancy service provider. And he also shared the link with more details about what ENET is doing. And he also shared the link in Arabic and in English to the poster that Ingrid was having in her presentation. And he says it's a poster that is aimed at parents, caregivers, and families. It's fun, it's colorful, it has short messages, and it also has some suggestions for how to support learning at home. And they are on the back side of the poster, basically. So I think that will be very interesting for everyone to look at.
Thank you, Lara. I'm sure more questions will come in as we go along. But For now, I think it's time to hear from our second speaker here with us today. Charlotte Bussard is a qualified bilingual teacher with extensive international and inclusive teaching experience. She worked as an inclusive education teacher and as an educational support advisor and a teacher training around the globe in countries like Cameroon, Bolivia, Switzerland, South Africa. In addition, she holds a master's degree in education and international development from the University College London, UCL. Charlotte has developed a teacher's guide while being an intern with the education cluster of the German Development Corporation, GIZ, in Jordan. Since then, she has joined one of the projects as a junior technical advisor. So a wealth of expertise. So Charlotte, I'll leave it to you.
Charlotte, I think you have to switch on your microphone. Couldn't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now? And you see my slides? Okay, then I can start. Thank you.
Charlotte, could you put this on presentation mode so that it becomes bigger?
Yes, I clicked on it and it's not yet working. I think now it's coming.
Perfect, perfect, that's perfect.
Can you see it now?
Yes, perfect.
But I actually can't see it now. So, yeah, now it should work. Okay, so good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for giving me the chance to present the GIZ Teacher's Guide for the first school day after school closure due to COVID-19 today in this webinar. So I work for the GIZ ILIPS project, which stands for Improving the Learning Environment at Public Schools in Host Communities in Jordan. And I wrote this teacher's guide together with my colleague Leah Hassib from the regional project Psychosocial Support for Syrian and Iraqi Refugees and IDPs. But unfortunately, she cannot present with me today. But if you have any questions regarding her part of work, I will pass them on to her and she will get back to you individually after the webinar. Yeah, I'm really happy to guide you through our teacher's guide for you to get a better understanding what it actually looks like. Here's my agenda for the presentation. I will start with some background information on why the idea to create this teacher's guide came up. Then secondly, I will talk about the teacher's guide's objectives. And thirdly, about what it has to offer. I will then quickly talk about the structure and some of the principles and best practices before showing you a few examples of the activities and the materials for you to get a better understanding of the teacher's guide. So some background information. Mental health and psychosocial support has not been addressed wide enough in Jordan yet. And due to COVID-19 and the school closure, the whole schooling changed from one day to the other. And new ways of learning were introduced and teachers as well as students needed to adapt really quickly, as we know. So this all led to a development of norms or new norms for teachers and for students. And as you can see in the graph on the right, the findings showed a change in behavior among children and Jordan during the lockdown and a severe increase in the numbers. So, and this will definitely have an impact, which can be seen in class after schools are reopening again. What the teachers need now is support and tools to deal with this new reality and this new form of teaching. So this teacher's guide is in line with the Ministry of Education guidelines for the reopening of schools. It offers guidance for the teachers and activities they can implement. And the focus is specifically on the Jordanian context, in line with the local school and teaching setup, the social norms and values. The teacher's guide is intended to address the following key points. It is a tool to support finding a way back into school life for teachers as well as for learners, to foster a feeling of school community and belonging among the students, to provide a safe space to talk about the experiences of the past few months, to avoid and prevent social stigmatization, and also to sensitize teachers to potentially change behaviors of children caused by distress, domestic violence, loss, etc., and then to act accordingly. So what does the teacher's guide offer? The teacher's guide offers a variety of so-called info boxes with information and recommendations for teachers, which help them get prepared for the new circumstances at school. This, in addition to a variety of differentiated and inclusive teaching activities for primary, lower and middle secondary school level. And last but not least, a referral list for specialized support is included in the teacher's guide. Here you see an overview of the principles and best practices that are highlighted in the info boxes. On the next slides, I will provide a few examples of the boxes that are marked here in red. So the signs of de-stress, inclusive education for all learners, referrals and specialized support, and methodological considerations. The first one I want to point out here is the info box about signs of distress among children. This includes information about the most common signs of distress according to different age groups. This is for teachers to better understand and address potential related changes in behavior and so to act accordingly. For example, it is important to know that signs of distress can vary from person to person, and that signs and reactions of distress among children or adolescents vary according to their age, to previous experience, and to the individual cope mechanisms. And also that the school can contribute to students' well-being by creating a safe place, offering stability and routine, and where a child can connect with others and develop normally. The second one I want to mention here is the info box inclusive education. The gathered information shall help the teachers to continuously put on what I call their inclusive education lenses. So to ensure access to quality education, as it is required in the SDG 4, in a non-discriminatory and inclusive classroom or school environment, teachers need to consider all of the listed factors, such as gender, religion, ethnicity, nationality, language, and of course, impairment and disability. It is really important to consider all learners when we talk about inclusive education. Well, since the cases of students with impairments or disabilities are so individual, these 3 steps need to be considered by a teacher when preparing the activity or a lesson in general for students with impairments or disabilities. The first step is to get to know the student by listening and finding different ways to communicate, because often the focus is only on students' impairment so that the real barriers to their progress can be overseen. Then the second step is to find the right way of communication so that the student can share his or her views and feelings. And the third step is to ensure that all students can participate in the activity. They should be given enough time to understand and also to formulate their responses. These 3 steps can serve as a mental anchor for the teachers considering students with impairments or disabilities. And a list of tips for teachers dealing with different impairments in class was also included in the guide. This serves to support them even more with concrete ideas. And this is, of course, only a snapshot of it, and I'm not going into detail here. I just wanted to show you an extract of how this looks like. Here are 3 examples of tips considering visual impairment, hearing impairment, and speech impairment. And here you find the examples considering mobility impairment, psychosocial disabilities, and intellectual disabilities. And these tips are all adopted from a toolkit from the No Just Lost generation. So the next info box includes a list of methodological considerations. And when doing the suggested activity, the teacher needs to make sure that this activity is suitable for their specific group of students. And if this is not the case, the activity needs to be adapted. So before starting any activity, it is really important also to create a trustful and respectful setting in the classroom. Students need to feel safe so that they can really get engaged with the activity. And the teacher has to be prepared when this happens and has to know how to act. It is really important to point out that the time frame is only suggested. It is on the teacher to decide how long to stay in the activity with the students. So the teacher needs to be flexible with the planning. It always depends how much the students get engaged with the activity. And the last box, the last info box I would like to mention is the referral system. There is specialized help for psychosocial support available. The intention of this info box is to create awareness and also to encourage teachers to act proactively by referring these at-risk students to the school counselor or to a mental health specialist. And here you see an extract of the detailed referral list with different categories, such as health services, child protection, or psychosocial support. And you also find in which locations these services operate and how and when they can be reached. Lastly, I'm now coming to the activities and materials included in the teacher's guide. As I already mentioned, these are all differentiated according to different age groups and grades. In total, there are five activities, which can be used in a way that they build up on each other. But a teacher can also select 1 or 2 activities or change the order of the activities, depending on what is most suitable for their class. And again, this is only suggestions. These are only suggestions, and the teacher decide how much they want to make use of it. So here are now a few examples. This is an example for a grade 1 to 3 activity with an extract of the worksheet. This activity is intended to be a warm-up activity or a so-called icebreaker, because the main objective of this activity is for students to connect with their classmates and to give them room and time for an exchange, and also to find who might have had similar experiences in the past few months. And social objectives such as respect and tolerance, empathy, and self-awareness will also be trained in this activity. And for each activity, there is a detailed description. So what you see here is only an extract. But I want to highlight the inclusion aspect, which is taken into account in every activity. These tips and considerations can help the teacher when planning the activity in order to make it as inclusive as possible. This is an example of an activity for grade 4 to 6, where learners reflect on the issue of social stigma using a cooperative learning method. And here, the last activity I will show you quickly before my time is up is for grade 7 to 10, the so-called mood barometer, or the optional mood postbox. This is either a poster on the wall or a box, and each day the students put a note on the mood barometer or in the box, indicating how they are feeling. If they want, they can add their names and or a note on the back. And the idea behind is for the teacher to keep track of students' emotional well-being by checking the notes and the comments every day, and for the student to regularly reflect on how he or she is feeling, and if needed, to give them a tool to ask for help. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that now you have a better idea about what the Teacher's Guide contains and looks like, and how mental health and psychosocial support can be addressed in schools. Thank you, and of course, I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Charlotte. Very, very enlightening and interesting. The strategies you outlined, beginning with listening to the student and then communicating to the students their needs, and then making way for the participation, whether it's within the classroom or beyond the classroom in the school, was very, very useful. And the psychosocial element and support is really, really noted. So thank you for that. I personally really enjoyed it, and I hope our participants and attendees really did too. I'm wondering, Sireen, Laura, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. We actually have a lot of questions, so I try to structure it a bit. There are some questions for Ingrid, and there are some now for Charlotte. Also, Eamon from ENET, he shared a few more links. One is regarding the ENET home education response during the COVID-19 crisis, where it's about their project that provides some small mentoring resources for parents, carers, and families with children with disabilities. And the other one is the ENET mailing list, where you can subscribe to. For Ingrid, first of all, we had the comment, thank you for the presentation, it was really wonderful. And then the question, what immediate steps can you suggest to help create this shift towards connecting learning at home with the curriculum? And maybe directly to this, another, unfortunately anonymous, but still, this person agrees with you regarding the idea that education should not be only related to the regular modes of education. It should also include the learned skills and other life-based topics. But here the question is, what are the modalities to measure this kind of learning? Should it be unified, or should it be just left to the tutor or parent to teach for the child? Maybe first those, and afterwards we go to the questions for Charlotte.
I'm just wondering, looking at time, if we will tackle the questions now, or maybe do them in the half an hour we have left later on, because we still have two more speakers. So maybe I think let's carry on with the speakers, and then we'll take the questions then, if that's okay with Ingrid and Charlotte, of course. Yeah. Okay. So without further ado, I will now turn the attention to the Ministry of Education in Jordan, to Abir Marar, who is a technical coordinator and translator at the DCU, the Development Coordination Unit at the MOE. She has been working there since 2000, involved in different activities. Amongst others, she provided training on gender issues and concepts within the Ministry of Education and supported the work on the Education for All midterm report in 2007. Abir holds a higher diploma in IT and education from the University of Jordan and a bachelor in English language and literature from Jeresh University. Abir, the floor is yours, and welcome aboard again.
Thank you. Thank you, Alia, for this nice introduction. Can you hear me, everyone? Can you hear my voice? It's okay. Okay. First of all, I would like to say that I tried throughout following up with all these recommendations and webinars. I try to wrap up the most key messages and recommendations, but maybe I'm sure that there are many other issues and points that were highlighted and stressed all over the presentation. So I would like to first thank everyone, the Higher Council, the GIZ, and everyone who have worked hard to make this webinar successful. And as we had the opportunity to meet people from all over the world and to have better ideas about inclusive education and to benefit from their experience. These webinars have provided us with recommendations that will be for sure considered for the implementation of the 3-year plan that the ministry is intending to implement, which is also based on the 10-year strategy for the inclusive education. And also these recommendations will be considered as a part of the education strategic plan, as we're planning to have as an annex of that plan to have it, to give it more focus and more attention. I will start now with the recommendations, and I would like to say that when we are now planning to support inclusive education at schools, which will require the cooperation of many stakeholders, with donors, with the ministry and different departments at the ministry. Now we should pay attention to the measures that we are taking according to distant learning, that this learning includes students with disabilities, and all learners can access this type of education, because we still don't know about the next scholastic year. We might resort to distant learning, but the ministry is planning to have blended learning, school learning, and distant learning, of course. For the teachers, we need to give teachers training on inclusive education, and it is not necessarily that these teachers are specialized in inclusive education or teaching students with the special needs, because this is a cross-cutting issue at the ministry, and we need to have it included and mainstreamed in all the education system. For the mental health and socio-emotional well-being, I would like to say that many donors, and with the support of many donors, the ministry is giving much attention for this aspect. as it is very important to have it, to give it good attention. And actually the ministry has implemented a study through one of the consultancies on NEET, and they have, they have conducted a needs assessment study for socio-emotional skills at the students, at a sample, of course, of the representative sample of all schools. And they have provided the final report, which will be the basis for working on socio-emotional well-being and socio-emotional skills. Also, all donors and the authorities, the NGOs, CSOs, all these need to work collaboratively together and to coordinate, so that we make sure that all efforts are working on the same direction and that we are all on the same page, and also that there are no duplication among these donors and NGOs. Also, this achievement of providing quality education for all will need to have inclusive approaches between all organizations, all the stakeholders, all teachers, and anyone who is concerned with the educational sector and the educational issues. Since everyone will be involved in the education, we need to identify their roles and responsibilities, as I said before, because when we provide continuous professional development for teachers and also for supervisors and awareness for parents, we can ensure that the education process is making a success, and is also achieving its objectives. Due to the economic situation, I think we can look for creative solutions, for cost-effective ideas that can be implemented at schools, implemented for the students with the special needs, that will have a low cost and also will be easily implemented by the ministry, and provide the students with the special needs with the opportunity to participate and get involved in the education process and in the learning process. Finally, I would like to talk about sustainability, because this is a very important issue for all beneficiaries. We don't want to provide the education opportunities for students with special needs on the short run. We want this to be sustainable and maintained for the future, so that the students will be motivated and they will be sure that the ministry and donors and all stakeholders are providing them with the quality education programs. And this also will require continuous monitoring and evaluation for these programs, so that we can bridge the gaps if found, and also we can benefit from the lessons learned. Thank you for listening, and I would like to thank you again. Thanks everyone for these webinars, which were really a creative idea for providing the ministry the opportunity to talk and to listen to others and to get ideas from everyone. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, Abir, for this recap. As the lead implementing partner in this process to ensure that the 10-year strategy is implemented properly, I think your ideas are key, especially that, the need for multi-party, multi-resource, collaborative approach that is also cost-effective and thinking of sustainability. So not just now, but later. So And on that, I think it's important here to say that GIZ has the idea that after the webinars, or after we finish today and the days to come, the team will be sharing with everybody the different presentations and the key takeaways from each presentation and the key resources. And those, as we said earlier, will be available in Arabic, so that both languages are operational. Just before we carry on, I would just like to note that there's been a slight change of in the order of the agenda for today. So I think we'll delve into the Q&As, the questions and answers from the different participants, hearing from Ingrid and from Charlotte, and then we will close with the closing remarks from His Excellency, the Minister, who's just joining us via video live stream. And then, of course, a final word from Stephanie. So should we start with the Q&As?
Yep, so maybe picking up, we can start with the questions for Ingrid, but of course, Charlotte, always feel free to jump in. So the two main questions for Ingrid were, what immediate steps can you suggest to help create the shift towards connecting learning at home with the curriculum? And education should not be only related to the regular modes of education that only measure learning process, according to science or math or others. It should also include the learned skills and other life-based topics. But what are the modalities to measure this kind of learning? Should it be unified, or should it just be left up to the tutor or parent to teach for the child?
Okay, they're huge questions, so they need webinars in their own right to answer them. But I guess the immediate steps are they're going to vary depending on where each education system is already at in terms of how it operates. But I think, there's going to be advocacy needed so that governments are open to the idea and they're willing to ensure and allow flexibility and not put teachers under pressure to so immediately and rigidly go back to the pre-COVID curriculum. So I think there's those of us that work in education advocacy are already working on how we can encourage governments to sort of not just jump straight back into where they were, and to spend some time rethinking. And there's going to need to be support and training for teachers. As part of inclusive education, we're always encouraging teachers to think about their lesson planning and to differentiate their lessons and their materials and come up with locally appropriate and adapted materials. And I think there's a need for an increased amount of training around that for teachers in relation to how they more effectively link their curriculum and their lessons to the home life. But for me, I think what would be top of my list would be for there to be much more consultation now with parents and learners and actually find out what they've experienced, what they want next. And this has to be a period of much bigger voice for families and learners now, and not just sort of saying, right, back to school, let's carry on. It's like, okay, well, we are going to open schools, but now we need to really invest in that opportunity to talk to you, find out what you want from education, find out what you've experienced, what you need next. That's probably my biggest next step is listening to the voices of those people who've been through this. But there's loads that could be said here. I won't go on forever. The second question about how we measure this kind of learning. Again, this is linked to a much bigger debate on how we measure learning anyway, and therefore the much wider debate on moving towards competence-based curricula and assessment systems, and moving away from simply measuring children's memories and their ability to cope under pressure. So it comes into the context of reforming curriculum and assessment systems generally. I mean, overall, we want to be measuring learners' skills. We want to be measuring their capacity to show us what they've learned and to implement what they've learned. And yeah, I mean, the question was, does it need to be unified? I mean, yes, there would need to be guidance for teachers on how to use sort of skills-based, competency-based assessments. But I think also there needs to be a move towards giving teachers more freedom to work with parents on measuring learning, and not have it just dictated from above. So I think maybe the answer is a bit of both. It needs to be unified, but also more freedom for families and teachers to work together on how they want their learners to be assessed and what should be assessed. And things like project-based learning offer opportunities for that, in terms of measuring skills and competence and how activities are implemented across subjects in the curriculum and implemented across settings. Project-based learning doesn't have to be just done in a school, it can be done in home, in the community, and so on. So I don't know if that answers the question. It's such a huge question, I don't really know where to start for a quick answer.
Okay, thank you so much, Ingrid. And then we had a couple of questions for Charlotte. One question was, how will this teacher's guide be distributed to the teachers? Do you actually believe that the teachers will do those activities from the guide when they are already under time pressure because material was missed during the lockdown, there is decrease in class time, there's a new way of shift in the school? And can you share the teacher's guide?
Yes. So I think the first and the third question I can answer in one. So, well, yes, it can be shared and it will be shared. It's actually we are now in the final steps of finalizing, fine-tuning it. And then it will go to the Ministry of Education, and they will decide how to distribute and how to, what to do with the teacher's guide. So, and yes, I do. Well, I really hope that the teachers will use this teacher's guide and will implement these activities, because, well, being a teacher myself, I know how important it is to build a stable ground at the beginning of a school year where learning actually can happen. And it's really important to make the first day at school a special day, and not to think about all the content which was like there behind, or the material missed and everything. I know it is difficult because there's so much pressure for the teachers, but I think it is important when students don't feel well, learning can't happen. And so on the long run, they can catch up much better when you actually take this time as a teacher to invest in the first day or the first days and do these activities, because it creates this atmosphere and confidence, and the children feel better, and then you can really kickstart it again. So I really, really hope that teachers make use of it. And that's why we actually put in so many information to give them as much guidance as possible, and also to create worksheets. So they actually just have to take it, and they don't have to prepare so much anymore. And and I hope they see the value of it, and that it really makes sense to start the school year after such a difficult time in a really good way and in a caring way. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Charlotte. And actually, there was one comment just agreeing with you, saying that the teacher's guide is a great idea, and it should be considered while the first semester when schools reopen. Teachers are mentors in the first place. Their efforts are appreciated, and it falls under their responsibility to aware and comfort students. We all know this is not going to be an ordinary school year, and slight changes in the teaching models should take place. Therefore, now we should concentrate on the children's experience, specifically the past 3-4 months, not what is written in the curricula, at least in the first semester of the scholastic year. So yeah, that fits with what you just said. And then I have a bit more general question, and maybe I'm not sure who can or will answer that. Maybe we get it from different perspectives. It's a comment through this webinar series. We can see greater demand and emphasis have been put on the psychosocial support in schools and the importance of the child's mental and psychological safety globally. In the Jordanian context, and more specifically in governmental schools in Jordan, who can provide this kind of support? Is it the school counselors, or who could it be? Yeah, maybe from Abir's perspective, MOE's perspective, but also maybe Charlotte and Ingrid from your experience.
Well, actually, I could answer this maybe. Actually, that's why we included this referral list. So we only saw an extract of it, but it's a long list with all the numbers and different categories. And it is, of course, the school counselor, but they can't do everything, and they can take care of some students, but some they might need to be referred to a mental health specialist. And so there is this list in the teacher's guide where you can find all the details, like the details and the numbers. This is what I can say.
Yeah, maybe Abir from the Ministry of Education perspective. Maybe.
For the question about the mental and social health for students and social safety and psychosocial support, now the ministry will start the second phase after the needs assessment. We will work with some donors that will be representing their agencies on providing this support for students, and the ones who will be responsible in the schools. First, let's start from the ministry center. The counseling and orientation division will be responsible for this support, and also at the field directorates levels. Also, we have other counseling divisions, and every school has one or two counselors that will be implementing this support through designed and well-tailored programs for students. Some schools, as you know, have one, and the other schools have two, and this is not enough number for providing this support. So the teachers also will be working with the counselor to provide this support. We've started, we have, with one of the donors and education partners, we have developed a student workbook, let's say, and a teacher's manual for providing this support. And now we will have the pilot phase to train teachers of certain subjects on this manual, so that they can provide social support for the students during presenting their material and during the teaching process itself. That's واضح.
Yes, thank you, Abir, for answering for the ministry. Actually, my co-moderator or moderator of today, Alia, she's facing some technical problems. So I'm jumping in again. It's me, Stephanie Petrasch, from the GIZ Promise project. And I heard like from Savine and Laura, there are no more questions currently. We received like some comments, but then I would just say that we jump to the video of His Excellency, the State Secretary of the Ministry of Education, Dr. Nawaf Mansour Al-Akil Al-Ajame. And Savine, I think it's you to present the closing remarks from the Ministry of Education.
تحياتي للجميع. بداية أود أن أتقدم بالشكر لجميع المشاركين الذين قاموا بمتابعة المؤتمرات الافتراضية، ونتوجه بشكل خاص إلى كافة المتحدثين من خبراء والذين يعني قدموا تجاربهم وخبراتهم والتي وجهت التعليم نحو مفهوم دامج وشامل لكافة المتعلمين. أيضا الشكر يمتد إلى زملائنا في المجلس الأعلى لحقوق الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة وممثلة بسمو الأمير، وأيضا لعطوفة الأمين العام الدكتور العزة، فريق مشروع دعم الجودة في التعليم الدامج والتابع للوكالة الألمانية GIZ. هذه المؤتمرات بحاجة إلى تنسيق وتعاون بين كافة المعنيين لإنجاحها. في يناير 2020 أطلقت وزارة التربية والتعليم الاستراتيجية العشرية للتعليم الدامج 2030 وبدعم من الوكالة الألمانية GIZ، وتم تنفيذ الاستراتيجية بالتعاون مع المجلس الأعلى لحقوق الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة وغيرهم من أصحاب أيضا المصلحة والخبراء المعنيين. هذه الاستراتيجية بطبيعة الحال تضمنت التعليم الدامج، والتي تتماشى مع الخطة الاستراتيجية للتعليم في وزارة التربية والتعليم 18-22، وأيضا الاستراتيجية الوطنية لتنمية الموارد البشرية 16-25. بالتالي بتكلم عن أن الحق في التعليم للجميع الناس بغض النظر عن العمر، عن الجنس، عن الجنسية، عن العرق، وأي تمييز أيضا آخر. هذه الاستراتيجية العشرية بطبيعة الحال هي تعمل كإطار ورؤية لتوفير التعليم المنصف والعادل لجميع الناس، جميع الأطفال، جميع الطلاب، على النحو المحدد بالفعل والدستور الأردني. والدستور الأردني بيضمن حق التعليم لجميع الطلاب وجميع الناس. وبطبيعة الحال الوضع الوبائي الحالي أو ما مر به العالم من وضع وبائي وما أعقبه من حظر تجول في العديد من بلدان العالم أظهر تحديات جديدة للتعليم بشكل عام. نتكلم عن 1.5 مليار طالب على مستوى العالم تأثروا في التعليم، لكن أيضا من أكثر الناس اللي واجهوا التحديات هم الطلاب ذوي الإعاقة بشكل خاص، مع أن وزارة التربية والتعليم يعني فتحت منصة وقامت يعني خاصة في طلاب الثانوية العامة قامت بعمل فيديوهات خاصة لذوي الإشارة، وبالإضافة للطلبة يعني اللي عندهم مشاكل في التوجيه ولم ينقطع عنهم التعليم. كان هناك تحديات كبيرة بهذا الموضوع. تم إغلاق جميع المدارس الخاصة والحكومية، وبنطلع على عام دراسي جديد 2020. هذا وضع غير مسبوق أن يضع التلاميذ والمعلمين الإداريين في وضع غير متوقع، يتطلب منا حقيقة حلول جديدة، ابتكارات جديدة لمعالجة الآثار الجانبية على التعليم ورفاهية الأطفال. استجابت وزارة التربية والتعليم على الفور إلى الوضع، وقدمت منهاج تفاعلي عن بعد ووسائل الإعلام، وضعت أدوات التعليم عبر الإنترنت مع تضمين مواد أخرى. استخدمت وزارة التربية والتعليم طرق بديلة مختلفة للتدريس للوصول إلى أكثر من 2 مليون طالب الخطة الاستراتيجية للتعليم في منازلهم، ومع ذلك أكثر من ذي قبل. غالبا ما يتم نسيان أطفال ذوي الإعاقة والأطفال هذا تكلمنا فيه بالضبط، أنه يعني كان هناك تحديات زيادة على التحديات، وجود أطفال ذوي الإعاقة في فترة الكورونا. تحديات أخرى تضاف لهم، وكانوا أكثر عرضة يعني وخطر لمواصلة تعليمهم. طبعا بذل المانحون ومنظمات غير الحكومية الدولية ومنظمات غير الحكومية جهود كبيرة للتأكد من عدم تخلف أحد عن ركب التعليم في الماضي. نفذت وزارة التربية والتعليم بالاشتراك مع المجلس حقوق الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة في الأردن وبالتعاون مع الوكالة الألمانية الجائزة بإجراء واستضافة سلسلة من 6 مؤتمرات افتراضية عبر الويب ستجرى استجابة للوباء كوفيد 19. والهدف العام من سلسلة المؤتمرات هو نشر المعرفة حول كيفية ضمان أن تكون الفئات الضعيفة والمحرومة والمهمشة مع التركيز على الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة، هم جزء لا يتجزأ من المجتمع وعلينا جميعا أن ندرك هذا الأمر. يعني الفكرة بتتمثل بصراحة أنه هذه المؤتمرات بتخلق مساحة كثير كويسة ويكون في توعية للجميع، لأصحاب المصالح، لأصحاب القرار، للشركاء الرئيسيين بجوانب الاندماج، والتي يجب أن تراعي هذه الخدمات أثناء الوصول إلى جميع الأطفال والشباب في الأردن تحت مظلة استراتيجية التعليم الدامج. احنا بنشكر الجي اي زد، بنشكر جميع الخبراء اللي كانوا معنا، نشكر جميع القائمين على هذا الأمر، المجلس الأعلى لحقوق الإنسان، الأهل، الأسرة، الجميع اللي تفاعلوا، أهل الإعلام أيضا نشكرهم على إيجاد مساحة كافية لهذا الأمر. الله يعطيكم العافية ونبقى دائما على تواصل، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you very much.
So, hello everyone. Sorry, there was a temporary technical glitch. Stephanie, thank you for stepping in. I actually just caught the last bits of the closing remarks. So I think I will simply say and reiterate that what His Excellency's last point was about the need for creating e-learning platforms and e-learning initiatives that take into account the reasonable accommodations and the accessibility and the different needs of all people with disabilities, regardless of their disabilities. I don't know, Stephanie, where you reached in terms of the Q&As, so I'll give you the. Okay, so you're done with the Q&As? There's no more questions? Okay, yes. I think we have about 6 minutes left till we finish. So I'm wondering, are there any other comments, questions, anything the speakers would like to reflect on? Doesn't.
Yeah, Savine, Laura, is there anything else in the chat?
From my side, nothing in Arabic today, so it's mostly like comments requesting the link for the recorded webinar. It's already like shared that all webinar will be shared in the Higher Council website and the Ministry of Education website, and also will be sent via email to all participants. So that's from my side. I'm not sure, Laura, if you have anything in English to share.
No, I think we had all the questions and all the comments.
Okay, so then I will bow out. Thank you for this opportunity, and I will give you the floor, Stephanie. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you, Alia, and I'm so happy you were able to solve the technical problem so that we can have a proper farewell goodbye now, because it's the last webinar, as announced in the beginning of our series of 6 webinars. And I mean, I honestly, like before starting to thank, I mean, again, all the co-moderators I had, but also like the team in the background and all the presenters. I like to thank Savina Altali and David De Battista, because if it would be for me, we would have already finished after 4 webinars, because I saw the great amount of work behind that. And David and Savine, you pushed for 6 webinars, and I'm especially thankful for that one, because we couldn't have the last session looking at building back better. But I also think the previous one on the parents was really interesting, like the 4th we had before. So it's like rounding it up very nicely. So thanks for pushing for the 6 webinars. And I mean, usually like seeing all the work behind the scene, and especially like looking on the technical issues, you know, because we wanted to do an inclusive webinar, like having 2 different languages, having sign interpretation, recording the webinars, later on even translating in the language that hasn't been presented. It's of course a great work, but I think it's worth all the efforts. And the webinars, as already said, will be recorded and will be uploaded, so that we even have it for later on. Yes, it was like a great pleasure also working with the Ministry of Education and the Higher Council for the Rights of People with Disabilities, who are the owners of the 10 years inclusive education strategy. And I think like for all of us, it has been a journey in the last months. And for all of us, it had been also very important to again focus on the strategy. And yes, it didn't lose importance, it gained importance. And I mean, Ingrid had said it, and we know it now by going maybe back to the schools in August in Jordan. It's a big chance we have now to refocus again and starting building back better and including every child. So this, I think it was like the purpose is kind of solved. And also like really thank you for both organizations for supporting this webinar series. Before I show now all the presenters and speakers again, a special thank of course to our last speakers from today, Ingrid and Charlotte. It was a pleasure to have you. And then before I show now the slides, please have a look at the feedback form. The link is shared in the chat. And it always helps us to improve. And even like the webinar series is like now finalized, but maybe we will have another one next year. I think we need a bit of a break, and also like there's a lot of next steps following up with our partners. We are currently selecting the different field directorates and schools for starting our piloting. We started to think about capacity development, trainings, and yes, there's a lot of things we are going to proceed with, but it's also like one of the things why bringing in different persons from different countries, from different organizations, is also to get the support we need in Jordan. And I think like already there a great network is established, and also like I saw always in the chat also like organizations from Jordan posting comments, sharing their experience. So that's also great to see that, because that's also something we can build on. Yes, so at last I will share my slides, so that we again have a look on the tremendous support we had. So first, again, thanks to all speakers. And I think like we really traveled in our webinars around the globe. And also great, Ayman, I saw you also today joining the webinar. Thanks also for your comments. And it was great. Like, I think the work you do, yeah, and Ingrid, it's great resources. Thanks also again here, different speakers from the Ministry of Education, but also the network of the Higher Council. And at last, the moderators and facilitators, and the translator, the sign interpreter, Julia. And our man in the background who brought Alia back today, Alia Korma, thanks for your technical support. Yes, so I wish everybody, it depends where you are, a good start into the day, a good rest of the afternoon. I will have it in Germany. I'm currently in Germany, and Jordan is almost a bit ahead, but you have a rest of the afternoon and then hopefully a good evening. And please keep in contact, stay in contact. That was also great to see in the last weeks that we got a lot of requests, like after every webinar, somebody else came and was writing me or the team and interested to join. And we hope to keep contact. We all collected the different email address, and we definitely will keep you updated. But we're always happy if people, organizations also want to share their experiences with us. So goodbye.
And goodbye from me.
Yes, thank you.